how did this project all come together?
This project is pretty much about 14 years in the making. I started basically on working on another film as a makeup effects artist, and that's where I started in the industry. And what we were doing was basically creating masks for Son of the Mask and makeup and prosthetics and whatnot. And my mentor, Ray Heikes, was on crew, and that's where I started my career. And I met a lot of the people involved in the original creation of the first film. And I had joked around for years, that we were going to make a movie because of, the terrible bomb that was Son of the Mask. And so we ended up going back, I'd say 4 or 5 years ago. Me and my friend Kyle, we kept writing scripts saying, oh, you know what, let's do it. Let's actually do it. And it came down to, I think, about 4 different scripts. And then my good friend Karen Klosky ended up passing away last year. And that was kind of the kick in the ass to say, hey, because she was the creator of the original prop. And right before she passed, she sent us one of these, which
That's amazing.
was, this is a Hero A2 copy of The Mask from the original film.
Gotcha.
And basically she said, hey, go ahead and take a mold of it for your film. I have a couple of masks from Son of the Mask, and I have one from the original film, but they're all too delicate to take actual molds of. And so I did, and shortly thereafter she ended up passing away. And so we said, okay, now we have to do it. And so we gathered the money together, me and my wife Christina, and we said, okay, we have probably about 6 months to pull it off. And then we went through the process of finding people to be involved in the project, and that's when I met with Lance Kwas, the director.
The director, yeah.
And I was working with him on a couple other projects at the time, and I'd worked with him a lot in the past. And then I knew I wanted someone who was a creative but dramatic director. I didn't want someone who typically does comedies or that kind of work, because I knew someone that kind of work with this darker material.
Which I was going to say, your movie takes a different twist to let's say the original one had a little bit of darkness.
Yes.
In there, little tiny bit, which I'm a huge fan of the original one, so I can't wait to see this new one.
Well, basically, the original concept of The Mask is based on a comic book of the same name. The Mask was a horror comic book that was released in 1989.
By Dark Horse. Dark Horse, okay.
And The Mask of the same the same title, was always meant to be a horror film. And it was written to be that until the director was brought aboard. And they kind of reimagined the script and said this could be much bigger if it was available to a broader audience.
Gotcha.
And they were right,
yeah.
Especially after they hired someone like Jim Carrey. And so I love that movie. That was my childhood, and being a part of the sequel was an honor regardless of how it ended. And I really thought, I don't want to do anything to step on the original, because I knew that people would just rip it apart. And I thought, what would be really interesting is to see a concept of a mask with no limits, because the closest thing we got to see of that is Dorian. Dorian in the story from the first Mask is about the closest thing to the Mask from the comic books as we got. And that's the interesting thing about the Mask, is it's not about a villain or really thereof in the comic books. It's putting on the mask and figuring out who you truly are. And in the comic books, it's more of a possessing entity that corrupts you over time. But we wanted to do a story, basically think of it like a man who thinks he's the hero and puts on the mask only to find out that he's actually the villain.